From across time and space and throughout the multiverse, listen as multiple generations of geeks come together to discuss the iconic characters, events, and franchises that make up the very fabric of pop culture as we know it. Let Your Geek Side Show presents Then and Now. Hey guys, this is Kitty.
And this is Autumn.
And I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. This week, we're going somewhere over the rainbow to look back on 80 years since the 1939 adaptation of The Wizard of Oz made film screens everywhere a little bit more vibrant. Inspired by the classic children's novel, this musical film has found its way into the hearts of many generations and still serves as inspiration for artists, filmmakers, and storytellers today. Since then, Oz has been brought to life over and over through numerous novels, films, comic books, and even record-shattering Broadway productions. But where did this story begin? And where else will the journey take us? Put on your ruby slippers and ease on down the road because we're off to see The Wizard of Oz then and now. Alrighty, so thank you for joining me this week, Autumn.
Of course. I cannot wait to talk about this.
I'm very excited, especially because you practically jumped out of your chair when I brought this topic to the table. This is an interesting one because it's 80 years of the film, but we're going to talk the entire franchise because the book is actually 119 years old this year, I believe. But The Wizard of Oz, most people immediately gravitate right towards that classic 1939 film.
But there's also the comics, and there was the spin-off movies, and there were animated series and books that were written with completely different points of view. So there's so much to this property besides the movie, but it always seems to stem right back to the movie.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
It's just, and the movie represented a lot of milestones for filmmaking. Even though it wasn't the first film to, people always go Technicolor. This was in Technicolor,
Right.
but it wasn't the first film to go into Technicolor. But then we have the ruby slippers, which weren't even ruby slippers in the original novel. They were silver. So a lot of the visuals of this property and the world of Oz really, really do come from the MGM movie.
And they were the big powerhouse at that time. So this was the big property for sure.
Yeah. So let's get started talking about the original film first. I mean, there's as we've pinned out in our notes, there are so many different things that have spawned since then.
Yes.
And for me, I don't know if I just wanted to get this out. Which of the three, the three Ozian, I don't even know if there's like a name for the trio, but the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion. Which one of them is your favorite?
I would have to say the Tin Man.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Lion's my favorite. I just sometimes you can tell a lot about a person based on who their favorite is. But so like I mentioned, this film has become iconic. The ruby slippers are some of the most treasured film memorabilia. There's several pairs. I know there's one in the Smithsonian. There have been some for auction and some that people don't know where the pairs of slippers are. But there's no denying the Emerald City visuals, the yellow brick road, all these vibrant things that were brought to life first in the film. So you had this sounds so rude of me. You're a little bit older than I am.
Yes, we're definitely from different generations. That's fair to say.
There we go. We got the then and now. So what was your experience with the original Wizard of Oz?
Well, they started airing it in 1956 on television and then annually starting in 1959. And all the way up until 1985, it was an annual showing that they did in the holidays. And a generation of people grew up, a couple of generations of people grew up with that being an annual tradition. And I was a part of that generation. In 1985, I was 13 years old, and that's when it first came out on VHS. So for my entire young childhood, the only way to see this movie ever was that annual holiday airing of the movie. So it was...
Was there a specific channel that aired it? Or
I want to say it was maybe CBS, but I just know that it was a big deal.
Okay.
And, I did some research on this, and in the first probably decade of this in the 1960s, this was considered on par with the Super Bowl because it was a huge deal because this was the only way to see it. Any kind of on-demand movies didn't exist. So if you missed it, you missed it. And so people would and I did this too.
And there was no pausing the television.
Pause. So, and there were commercial breaks in there, but it was very strategic of it would air at 6:00. So we would make sure that we had dinner first and we'd gone to the bathroom. We had our pajamas on. We had popcorn made and it's time we're going to watch. And then usually just before we went from black and white to color, there was a commercial break. So we'd all go run and go to the bathroom one last time. And so it was a really big family tradition. And then as I got older, even when it came out on VHS, and we could watch it whenever we wanted to, it still tended to like we somehow didn't really want to. Like we still wanted to watch it during the holidays, or we'd then watch it on the VHS in the holidays so we wouldn't have to have the commercial breaks. But we still saved it for the holidays. So to me, it's still a holiday movie, even though it has nothing to do with the holidays.
Just the general holiday season or a specific one?
It's got anywhere in December.
Okay.
So it feels strange to watch it other times of the year. It's very nostalgic, has all these warm, fuzzy family feelings of being excited for this moment together, for sure.
Oh, I love that. See, so by the time I was growing up and this was coming into my kind of pop culture consciousness, this was the favorite film of one of my best friends' moms, and so this was always on at their house. But they had the VHS or eventually a DVD. Always got to make sure to rewind the VHS.
Always be kind, rewind.
Be kind, rewind. But it was one of those things that, for me, also this and Star Wars, the impact of it was kind of dulled by the fact that it was like, yeah, this is a thing. Like a couple of my friends like grew up just watching this all the time. And so the accessibility of it didn't make the story any less significant, but the film itself was less of an event. But
it didn't have that air of mystery or exclusiveness to it.
Yes.
You could watch it whenever you want.
Yes. Yeah. And so even going back before it became regularly aired or on VHS, it was an event when it first came out. Like they made it into an event.
I did some research on this and it was really interesting. So the first 2 weeks that it came out, they had Mickey Rourke, who was the biggest male star of all time at that time, and Judy Garland in New York at one of the theaters, and they showed this film 5 times a day.
Ooh.
And on the weekends 7 times a day. And at the end of every show, they did a half-hour live show. Every single day. No days off for 2 weeks straight.
Wow.
And they had this whole half-hour show with a 20-piece orchestra that they did in this theater in New York. It was a really big, big deal.
So that was like the precursor to Marvel's post-credit scenes.
Absolutely, except it's live every time, and you have the star of the movie in it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
I know the theater, I mean, MGM, what a powerhouse, but I wonder if they understood the staying power of this film. I mean, the book had already been around for almost 40 years by that point.
Right.
It was in 1900 that...
The people that made it was already a part of their childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just then 40 years later to have this film and then to have it become an annual television event. And then my first experience, akin to the big spectacle of watching it all the time was seeing Wicked at the Pantages. That's where I got to see it. And that's fascinating because that actually came from a series of books written in the 90s by Gregory Maguire.
Oh, I ate those up. I loved those books.
Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
I actually don't know how many were in the series.
There were 2 I know for sure, but he also wrote other books like from the point of view of the Wicked stepsister and Cinderella and other characters that were the quote-unquote villains where he told their side of the story. But I think there was only 2 in the Wizard of Oz series.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's such a fascinating idea because only until recently, I mean, we've got this resurgence or this emergence of we have villains, but some of them are sliding into anti-heroes. I mean, I'm reading a Loki comic book from Marvel, and it's like, but if Loki wins, doesn't everybody else lose? Or like Harley Quinn, you've got the person who you started out knowing they were bad, but again, the villain is always the hero of their own story. But sometimes the villain isn't a villain; it's just the
point of view.
Yeah. So Wicked was such a huge deal for me because I was like, oh my god, I never thought of it that way. And it opened in 2003. It has now become the second highest grossing musical. It surpassed Phantom of the Opera, which had like double the run span of Wicked, but
That's
it made
amazing.
it made up that money in half as much time. And right now, and I think this is still current, it's second only to The Lion King, which
That's
has
amazing.
it's like 1.3 billion.
Would you say that was the biggest impact that this license had on you then? Was that
I think
seeing
so.
that?
I saw the musical twice, which was at that point in my life an extreme privilege. I mean, now I have friends who go see Broadway shows, like they do the ticket lotteries and stuff.
Oh,
but
right.
like to see live theater is a privilege. Unfortunately, I think they should make it more accessible. but I believe now there's even talks of doing a Wicked movie.
Yeah.
There's been talks of that for a while.
It really was as big of a deal for you as it was for me.
Yes.
Because it was very rare and special for me, and that was a rare and special thing for you.
Yeah, and this was going to the theater. This was essentially seeing the live after show, but for 2.5 hours with a 15-minute intermission. But that was also cool because not only did it reinvent who we believe was the villain, but it gave origins to a lot of the other characters, and it changed some of the stuff from the book. I mean, some of it as necessary for stage adaptation or just the way that the story was pieced together. But that a lot of fiction and this revisionist fiction deals in retcons and changing backstories, and sometimes it doesn't always work. But Wicked was one of those ones where it's like, oh my goodness, while it is so vastly different from what we see in that original film, because I was so already desensitized to, like, yes, she's Wicked Witch is evil and you got to throw water on her and Dorothy's the hero and we're not in Kansas anymore. Like, this whole story then seeing, but the witches were sisters and she was she was roommates with Glinda and then seeing the lives of the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Lion, how they were all affected. And like the Lion was especially affected by Elphaba trying to do good. And then the Tin Man was a damage control situation from her sister who went a little crazy. And the Scarecrow being a former lover. And then she was the daughter of the wizard. And it's just like, oh my goodness, like
that kind of stands on its own. It's its whole story by itself.
And that kind of world building was what was huge for me in that idea of like, oh, okay, the whole idea of pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. It's like, well, this is all the stuff that's on the flip side of that curtain. Like, here's what we didn't necessarily know. And I think that's the strength of that story, where the fairy tale part holds up so strongly, the Dorothy's adventure, but then to flip that all on its head with a musical inspired by and the between the book coming out and the movie or the musical, it wasn't that long of a time gap because
it really wasn't that long.
It was, let me see if I can do the math. 95 to 2003, that was like 8 years. Yeah, as opposed to the 40 years between the first book and the first movie.
Yeah. I think that speaks a lot to the impact that the movie has, because there was already a built-in audience, so it wasn't as big of a risk to take as maybe it was to make the book to make the first book. To make the first movie from the first book. Did you ever see in 1985 The Return to Oz?
I did not. I was going to say this wasn't even the first time that that Wizard of Oz was really revisited.
Yeah, that one was interesting because again, that was 85, right when everything came out on VHS, and when Hollywood was going through that period of making these like dark, edgier, slightly horror versions of movies for kids, like Labyrinth and Neverending Story and Return to Oz came out. And that one was based on the books, but again, it did take a big detour, but it had this kind of dark edginess to it that was real. Again, I was 13 at the time, so I just soaked it up. I was all about it because in my mind, I was so dark and edgy. So it was a pretty cool experience for sure.
Yeah, you showed me a couple of images while we were prepping for this podcast, and I definitely got that labyrinth vibe to it. But it's just so it like Alice in Wonderland is one of those, like the Land of Oz is something we can infinitely revisit, and those ideas that there's no way that everything that's lollipop covered or colored is like super like sweet all the time. Like there's something sinister about it
in there.
So, I mean, the flying monkeys, like those are scary. And I've seen play productions, like mostly amateur, like community theater or like high school, middle school play productions. Just a quick side anecdote. Two of my favorite instances was my mother was in the play as a child, and she was a flying monkey, and she was too scared to go out on stage because she herself was scared of the flying monkeys, which, I mean, she could have probably voiced that before like it came
maybe
opening
there was a time
night.
To say that.
Maybe there was. So she refused to go out on stage. And I once saw a school production of The Wizard of Oz, just straight regular. And there was a point at which they were trying to get the Cowardly Lion off the stage, and he was like, no. And somebody yanked his tail off the costume because it was a school production. It was a little cheapo. And this guy, I was so impressed by him. I'm like, this is like a 10, 12-year-old kid. He goes, oh, great, now I have to ask the wizard for a new tail, too. And it was just like, it was so funny. But people know the story so well that they can...
You can play with it.
Yeah, you can play with it. You can be afraid of your own role. I just think
That's great.
it's fun that and that even shows generations. Like my mother was in the play as a child, and it's such a fascinating world that you think also like we've explored enough of it, haven't we? But
I've seen so many book series out there, especially after I read Wicked. I was looking for more book series. I came across one at Comic-Con one year where there was the whole war and a battle, and Dorothy's involved in this battle with a scarecrow who's leading this rebellion against the Wicked Witch. And it was a completely different kind of like sci-fi. It's a little bit like what's the word I'm looking for? Steampunk.
Oh, okay.
Inspired like fantasy.
Yeah.
And that was a whole book series. It had like 7 or 8 books of its own. And it's like
wow.
you can just like you said, like Alice in Wonderland, you can just keep tapping into that world and going crazy with it because it's open and ready.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different themes you can choose to play up in each different adaptation. I mean, Wicked especially, because your little steampunk war thing made me think of in Wicked especially, the wizard is a corrupt government, and and the people are kind of mindlessly following him, the people of Oz. And so Elphaba is like the martyr for trying to overthrow this government that she herself may or may not be a product of. Fun fact I just remembered as well, Elphaba's name comes from L. Frank Baum, LFB, Elphaba. So that was really clever of Maguire. But then there's other versions where they play up other themes, and the one that comes to my mind especially is The Wiz. I mean, we can't talk about all these beautiful adaptations without talking about The Wiz.
Oh, The Wiz.
And that one has a lot to do with identity and pride in oneself, because there is the whole theme of you had everything you needed right inside of you. You just needed someone to kind of like show you that, and you needed a challenge to show you that. And so The Wiz, which its full title is The Wiz, the Super Soul Musical, Wonderful Wizard of Oz, was set in but came up in the 70s, and it dealt a lot with the pride of Black Americans and finding that identity, finding that the heart and the soul and the courage you're needed was inside of you the whole time kind of deal.
I think it's interesting that people can tap into this story again and again to tell whatever story they're trying to tell, and people can instantly relate to it because of the world, but you can tell infinite stories from this world, which I think is a mark of greatness of the original author. Yeah,
and not lightly, it is referred to as an American fairy tale. It's a Kansas rural American fairy tale, because I mean a lot of the great films that we then see are the stories that are Disney films and all those things. Those come from Europe and a lot of European tradition, but this is completely homegrown. I mean, it's in the Library of Congress as a quintessential American story. But then within that, yes, there's a lot of different facets to the American identity. And there is a strength then that you can pull out those themes. I mean, even finally, the representation we've all been waiting for. I don't know if it's still in development, but last I heard they were doing one. They were doing an adaptation that was from Toto's point of view.
Oh, no.
So they're doing, yes, because we haven't explored everything already. But
Toto's story has not been told.
Toto's, I mean, he's just been in a basket and he just got swept up for a ride. But I mean, also just going back briefly to The Wiz, like the star power behind that one, especially because yes, there's been so many adaptations, and some of them it's like this made careers, and some of it's like, okay, it just faded into obscurity. But Dorothy was played by Diana Ross and Whitney Houston in various adaptations. Michael Jackson, of course, was the Scarecrow in the film. And then they did a live telecast, which actually I think is cool. I think it was NBC. They've been doing those like live musical broadcasts, which does make it more accessible for people who have never seen these shows. And the telecast included Uzo Aduba, Queen Latifah, and Mary J. Blige, and Amber Riley, and and Neo was in it, I think. And so I do like that aspect that this especially was made more accessible for people. But that one is a cool juxtaposition of like the Black pride and culture, and then like versus Kansas fantasy. Like, does that work? And even like with Shakespeare, when people are like, oh, Shakespeare has to be set, like when you perform it, it has to be set exactly where it was written and blah, blah, blah. I think you get more richness out of the themes by taking it out of that context and putting it in situations where you go, I didn't think of that, but then the themes shine a little brighter.
Absolutely. When you take it out of the expected content, you see things more clearly maybe than you would have in its own setting.
Yeah, because she doesn't always need to be going back to Kansas. I mean, Kansas is a metaphor.
It is. Kansas is just home, wherever that may be for you.
Yeah. And Oz isn't necessarily the same exact brightly technicolored gold and green landscape.
Just this fantasy land. It's this other.
Yeah, but things are also very similar to what you know, but they're just different enough to challenge you.
Make you question yourself, make you question your choices and how you interact with people and all of that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting though also because I think a lot of people do view it as a sacred kind of story that since the Return to Oz, there hasn't been too many like, let's do more edgy grimdark. And I'm not saying that every single piece of media needs an edgy grimdark, but like this is one where it could go wrong very fast, and it is mostly uplifting, but like it would be interesting to see people do a little bit more of the horror take for.
It's definitely ripe for that. It hasn't really been explored.
Yeah. And then sometimes there's just more straight adaptations, but there is so much. There are more novels in the series. Marvel did a couple of 8-issue collections based on numerous books with Eric Shanower on the scripts and Scotty Young as the artist. And Scotty Young is very famous for like he does all the baby versions of Marvel characters on covers, but he has a very distinct style that I think lent itself very well to doing the World of Oz. But not only did they do Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which is the full title of the original book, but they did Ozma of Oz, Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz, The Road to Oz, and The Emerald City of Oz. So this they made it accessible to children through they captured the visual style of the bright colors of the World of Oz, but they did so in the comic book styling, which encourages reading. I think I'm a great advocate for comics are reading too. It's not just looking at pictures.
Absolutely.
And it teaches you a visual literacy that there's something in the films and there's something in the way that the productions are staged, but there's also the added layer of then comic books, and you can defy physics a little bit more in the comic.
Anything you want in the comic books, yeah.
True that.
I didn't read a lot of the comic books. Did they go off of the original source material for theirs? I think
they stayed pretty close to the source material, but they did a number of those books because like Ozma of Oz was another one of the books.
Right.
And
that's interesting.
Yeah.
I knew there was a whole series of books, and I only read, as a child, I read the first book and then maybe a second one, but I didn't get into the entire series. So, and I haven't really seen the other ones be explored in other media aside from these comic books, really.
Yeah, and I actually I'm not all up on my copyright laws, but I'm sure some of them are public domain-ish, maybe.
Maybe. Interesting.
I would depend on, I guess, the estate and how the whole franchise is handled. But
I'm kind of surprised now that I think of it that we haven't, given the popularity of it over the different decades, that we haven't seen. We did have Oz the
Great and Powerful
in 1993.
You sound really excited about that one.
So we talked about that.
Yes,
so
we
can
did.
Move on now. I did watch it as research for this podcast, and
you watched it as penance.
I did, and that's about all I have to say about that. I did watch it.
Okay, and that's the thing. I mean, here's another one. I'm not as familiar with this, but I saw some people talking about it recently. There's not necessarily a straight adaptation, but the inspiration of those themes that we've been talking about. Have you heard of the sci-fi film Zardoz?
No.
Okay, so Zardoz, I believe Sean Connery is in it.
Oh, boy.
I don't know the full plot actually, but I know it has to do with a sci-fi planet where there's Eternals and Brutals, and there's this like stone idol. So you're already thinking Wizard of Oz kind of.
How recent is this?
I think it's from the 80s.
Oh, okay.
It's not recent. No,
80s
it's
to me. Okay.
Yeah, and the Brutals are they're told by the idol to like fight each other because those who are the strongest and survive will have eternal life. But it takes the figure, the stone idol takes its name, Wizard of Oz. His name is Zardoz.
Okay.
And so that's what clues in one of the characters to, oh my God, he's not an all-powerful deity. He's manipulating people. He's smoke and mirrors, manipulating people. But there's a sci-fi film that even takes...
Interesting.
Yeah. And because the original film has added so many concepts and visuals to our pop culture lexicon. So, of course, we got the ruby slippers and the yellow brick road. And I don't think we're in Kansas. And there's no place like home. But like also the idea of the smoke and mirrors, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Like that's a thing that people just say when something's not going technically correct. They're like, oh no, don't pay any attention.
Don't look over here.
Yeah. Because whether or not it's used in a context of I'm deceiving you or I wasn't ready for you to see this, like it's one of those things that is
It's
so
just hard. It's ingrained in us.
yeah, and clicking your heels when you want to go home and
Yes.
one of the I couldn't find a way to organically bring it up in this conversation, but the like I'll get you next time, my pretties, and your little dog too, like
Yes.
I mean, even sounds like Scooby-Doo. Like if it wasn't for those meddling kids and their dumb dog, like
Yes.
it's one of those things where it's you're thwarted by a happy-go-lucky band of adventurers who just want to have a fun time.
Interesting.
But speaking of going back to the horror idea, you had the funniest description for the film.
Yes.
Where did you? That was something you found?
Somebody was saying, like, when they would have like TV guides or newspapers would publish descriptions of what was going to be shown on TV. This was back in like the 70s or 80s, and someone described it as dropped into some other world. A girl kills the first person she meets and enlists the help of 3 strangers to kill someone else. And this is an accurate description of the movie.
And this isn't John Wick. This is The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, so this is a great basis of a horror movie, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's another one of those things where it's like the themes of the film are so easy to pull out. The skeleton, it's got that mythological property that you could
flesh
just
it out any way you
take it out of
want.
context.
Yes.
So we could do an adaptation where she's a hit woman and
I mean, I'm
very
down.
specific.
Let's do this.
Yes,
Let's do this.
You heard it here first. So you could take it and it follows the same hero's journey, the story structure.
You could use so many of the plot points right in there and it would still play out. I mean...
And maybe the Tin Man's a serial killer because he's looking for a heart.
Yeah,
there's something a little...
Literally
yeah.
a heart and a brain that they are searching for, they gather along the way. Maybe they have to kill the wizard to take his
and
heart and brain.
the lion's an initiate and he just doesn't have the courage to... Anyways, oh my goodness. We've
gone off the rails.
We've gone
into
off the
Oz,
rails.
So
Yes.
I think it's time for us to
We'll
maybe click our heels.
pedal that. I was gonna say pedal that bicycle backwards because we're
Either one
sounding a little witchy there. Yeah. So I mean, oh my goodness. There's even there was a 2011 stage play. There's just been so many adaptations. Everybody kind of wants to take their crack at telling this story because of how. And I'm struggling to think of any others that I can immediately identify as such a cultural like part of American. It's not even folklore, but it is
persona.
our
It's
cultural
a part
persona.
Of who we are.
Yeah, because Kansas, like Kansas is where Superman's from too. And it's just one of those places where apparently legends are born in Kansas.
Yes.
But it is just the staying power of this book. I mean, we have a 119-year-old book and an 80-year-old movie that set the stage for literally and figuratively for countless adaptations where the core messages remain the same. Anyone can identify with those protagonists in whichever their goals are, to get home, to find out what they're doing in this strange land, to rise up against a corrupt government, even though people think you yourself are an evil witch, and just
or
like all
team
these
up and kill a stranger.
team up and kill a stranger, take her shoes,
Whatever you got to do.
appreciate good footwear. No, and so I just think that's a really cool testament to the staying power of this story. And I look forward to seeing what comes up in the next 80 years for The Wizard of Oz.
For our then and now podcast in 20 years.
Yeah. In 20 years, we'll revisit and we'll do then and now, and we'll listen to this podcast. We'll discuss this podcast. No. Anyways, it's clear that it's very easy to get lost in the land of Oz. But I'm sure most people listening have their own memories, whether or not it was the family event on the television or watching the VHS or seeing a stage play or seeing... I mean, maybe the telecast of The Wiz they saw was the first time that they were interacting with this. Every adaptation will be someone's first version of this story, which totally changes the way that you perceive the kind of American myth.
It into yourself.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that just about covers it. So we better click our heels now and get headed home. There's no place like home. But thank you guys so much for joining us, because that was The Wizard of Oz then and now. There's no place like home, and the land of Oz has proved time and again that it is home not only to fantastical creatures and characters, but it serves as a familiar place for countless fans across every adaptation and generation. Beloved by many, The Wizard of Oz serves as a quintessential American fairy tale, giving us the brains, heart, and courage to face our fears and follow our dreams. Sometimes we find the man behind the curtain, and the witch isn't always as wicked as she seems. But through it all, each and every vision of this classic story makes the world a more colorful place. Thank you for joining us on this trip down the yellow brick road. This has been The Wizard of Oz, Then and Now. Do you enjoy listening to Then and Now? We are proud to bring you pop culture content completely ad-free, but that doesn't mean we don't need your support to help keep us going. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting platform and help spread the word about our podcast. We welcome fan feedback. Email us at podcasts@sideshow.com with your thoughts and suggestions for how we can make our shows even better. Plus, tune in for our full network of pop culture podcasts. See if your fan favorites make the cut in the Geek Culture Countdown, a bi-weekly podcast featuring pop culture top 10 lists. Hear exclusive interviews with celebrities and pop culture industry leaders as they let their Geek Side show in Look Who Showed Up. Join comedian Jeff May and his special guests as they discuss anything and everything in Sideshow's Sideshow. Then, get all the latest pop culture news with our daily briefing, a 2-minute breakdown of the biggest geek headlines perfect for your Alexa or Google News briefings. We wouldn't exist without your continued support. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to let your geek side show.